In 2018, Dubai was a city built on excess, gold-lined streets, luxury towers, and people chasing dreams bigger than themselves. Among those who had conquered it all was Khalid Al-Nasir, a 47-year-old oil millionaire whose wealth came from drilling contracts across the Gulf. He was known in elite circles for his sharp business instincts, his taste for opulence, and his calm, commanding demeanor. His life appeared perfect: a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the marina, a fleet of imported cars, and an empire that seemed untouchable. Yet behind the flawless image was a man who often felt the weight of isolation. His days were consumed by meetings and deals, his nights by the quiet hum of loneliness that even money couldn't silence. That summer, Khalid attended a private yacht party hosted by a business partner. It was a glittering evening on the Persian Gulf, filled with champagne, flashing cameras, and the effortless laughter of strangers. Among the guests was a 28-year-old American named Emily Carter. She was a travel blogger from Los Angeles, wandering across continents to capture experiences for her growing online audience. Emily had come to Dubai chasing adventure, never imagining that her visit would change the course of her life forever. She stood out in the crowd, confident yet curious, radiating a warmth that immediately drew attention. When Khalid noticed her, he felt something shift. She was unlike the women he usually met in his social circle, outspoken, unpolished, and unapologetically real. He introduced himself, and despite the vast difference in their worlds, a connection sparked. He was fascinated by her stories of distant cities and cheap hostels, while she was intrigued by his quiet authority and the way people seemed to orbit around him. What began as a casual conversation stretched late into the night, until the city lights blurred into dawn. In the weeks that followed, Khalid and Emily became inseparable. He introduced her to his world of exclusivity: private dinners, designer boutiques, and weekend trips to hidden desert resorts. For Emily, it was intoxicating, a life she had only seen in movies. Khalid, in turn, found her spontaneity refreshing, a break from the scripted politeness of his usual company. Their relationship deepened quickly, and soon, Emily decided to extend her stay in Dubai. She moved into one of Khalid's smaller villas on the outskirts of the city, telling her followers she was taking time off to find inspiration. But beneath the surface, there were undercurrents neither of them noticed. Khalid's friends whispered about his growing obsession with the young foreigner, while his family disapproved silently from afar. To them, Emily was a distraction, a temporary fascination that could damage his reputation. Still, Khalid ignored the warnings, convincing himself that this time things were different. Yet, even as he fell deeper into the relationship, a faint unease lingered in his mind, a sense that something so sudden, so consuming, could not last forever. And in a city built on illusions, love too could be as dangerous as the secrets people kept hidden behind their wealth. By late autumn, the air in Dubai grew cooler, but tension between Khalid and Emily was reaching its peak. What had once felt like an escape for both of them was now turning into something heavy and uncertain. Emily had begun feeling unwell for weeks, constant fatigue, nausea, and mood swings. When she finally visited a private clinic, the result was clear. She was pregnant. At first, she sat in disbelief, her hands trembling as she stared at the test result. Then came a strange mix of fear and excitement. She imagined Khalid's reaction. Perhaps surprise at first, but followed by warmth, maybe even joy. In her mind, this would finally solidify their bond. When she told him the news, everything changed. Khalid's expression, instead of softening, hardened. He didn't say much, but his silence was sharp enough to cut through the air. Over the next few days, he withdrew completely. His calls became infrequent, and his tone grew distant. Emily felt the shift immediately. The man who once couldn't spend a night without her was now impossible to reach. When they finally met, he avoided eye contact, pacing the room with frustration. He told her the child could not be born, that it would cause problems, that his position, his business, and his name could not be risked. The words struck her like a blow. Emily had believed in their love and the promises whispered under the desert stars, but now it all seemed like an illusion. Khalid offered her money, a large sum to take care of things quietly. He spoke in cold, practical terms, as though he was negotiating a deal instead of facing the woman who carried his child. Emily refused, her pride and emotions clashing violently. She stormed out, but inside she felt cornered, alone in a foreign land, with no one to turn to, and a future unraveling faster than she could grasp. Over the following weeks, Emily's behavior became erratic. She called Khalid repeatedly, sometimes begging, sometimes furious. He stopped answering altogether. The staff at his villa began noticing her parked outside at odd hours, staring through the gates before driving away. She started leaving messages, handwritten notes left at his office and home, saying she only wanted to talk. Each one went unanswered. Rumors began circulating among Khalid's associates, whispers that the American woman was becoming a liability, someone he needed to handle before she caused real damage. Meanwhile, Emily's emotional state deteriorated. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and used. Every reminder of Khalid, the jewelry he bought her, the photos they took, the villa he let her stay in, turned into a painful symbol of deceit. Late at night, she would scroll through her old travel photos, remembering who she was before she met him. That carefree woman was gone, replaced by someone consumed by anger and heartbreak. The pregnancy, once a symbol of love, now felt like a curse, a secret growing heavier with each passing day. And as her resentment deepened, so did her thoughts of revenge. What began as sorrow was transforming into something darker, something she could no longer control. The night of November 22nd began like any other for Khalid Al-Nasir, but it would end in tragedy. His beachside villa in Jumeirah glowed softly under the city's distant lights, hosting an intimate dinner for a few close business partners. The evening was meant to be a celebration. A successful deal had just been finalized, and Khalid wanted to unwind. The table was set with imported wine, fresh seafood, and crystal glasses reflecting the dim, amber lighting. Laughter filled the space, and for a brief few hours it seemed as though Khalid had pushed his personal troubles out of mind. None of his guests knew about the turmoil surrounding his private life, and he intended to keep it that way. After midnight, the guests began to leave. The guards at the main gate confirmed everyone's departure, and soon the villa fell quiet except for the soft sound of waves lapping against the shore. Khalid walked out to the poolside terrace, removing his jacket and loosening his tie. The air was still and cool. He poured himself a final drink, staring into the water's reflection, unaware that someone was watching him from beyond the garden wall. Security footage from later that night would reveal a blurred figure entering through the back gate. The person wore a dark hoodie and moved with hesitation but clear intent. One of the guards, distracted by a phone call, assumed it was another staff member finishing up after the party. The gate closed quietly behind the intruder. Minutes passed. Khalid remained by the pool, his phone beside him, still unaware of the approaching danger. The next morning, the villa staff found him floating face down in the water. His phone, wallet, and designer watch were missing, but nothing else appeared disturbed. At first glance, it seemed like an accident, perhaps a drunken fall or a heart attack. But when police arrived, the evidence told a different story. A faint bruise was visible at the back of his head, and the water's surface showed traces of struggle. The medical report would later confirm the cause of death: blunt force trauma followed by drowning. Detectives began piecing together the final hours of Khalid's life. Security tapes from earlier in the night showed everyone leaving except one unidentifiable figure. The guards' statements were inconsistent, and none recalled hearing any commotion. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery. Expensive items inside the villa were untouched, and no locks were forced open. Whoever did it either had access to the property or knew how to move within it without suspicion. When they searched Khalid's phone records, one name appeared repeatedly in the days leading up to his death: Emily Carter. Dozens of missed calls, unanswered messages, and tense exchanges hinted at something unresolved. A few of the texts from Khalid's end mentioned ending things and dealing with the problem. To detectives, it painted a clear picture. The American woman was not just a part of his life, she might have been the reason it ended. Within hours, the investigation shifted its focus. The hunt for a killer had begun, and all evidence pointed to one person who had both motive and opportunity: the lover he had tried to erase from his world. 2 days after Khalid's death, Dubai police located Emily Carter at a modest hotel near Deera Creek. She had checked in under her real name, but seemed restless, avoiding staff and rarely leaving her room. When officers entered, she was in the middle of packing, a suitcase open on the bed filled with clothes and personal belongings. Among them were items that immediately drew suspicion: Khalid's gold wristwatch and his mobile phone, wrapped carefully in a towel. Nearby lay a printed plane ticket for a one-way flight to Istanbul, scheduled to depart the following evening. On the small desk sat an empty bottle of sleeping pills and several crumpled receipts. Investigators examined the receipts closely. One was from a hardware store, showing the purchase of a small hammer 3 days before Khalid's death. Another was from a taxi service, matching the time and location near Khalid's villa on the night of the murder. When asked, Emily appeared calm at first, but her composure began to crack under questioning. She admitted that she had gone to Khalid's home that night, but claimed it was only to talk. According to her, the conversation turned into a heated argument, and when he tried to walk away, she panicked. She said she didn't mean for it to happen. Still, the evidence suggested a different story. Forensic teams found traces of Khalid's blood on the sleeve of a jacket recovered from her suitcase. Her fingerprints matched those lifted from the poolside furniture and the handle of the hammer found in a nearby trash bin. Digital analysis of her phone revealed internet searches about head trauma, how long to drown, and legal rights for pregnant women abroad. The investigation painted an unsettling picture, one of premeditation rather than impulse. The trial drew enormous public attention, both in the UAE and abroad. The image of the young American woman accused of killing a Middle Eastern millionaire became an international headline. Reporters crowded the courtroom, and every hearing was followed by sensational media coverage. The prosecution argued that Emily planned the murder out of anger and resentment after Khalid rejected her and offered money to end the pregnancy. They described her as manipulative, using emotion as a weapon until rejection drove her to violence. Her defense team told a different story. They portrayed her as a victim, a woman deceived and abandoned, struggling alone in a foreign country while carrying a child. They claimed the death was accidental, the result of a confrontation that spiraled out of control. Emily often sat motionless during testimony, her expression unreadable. When questioned about her motive, she remained quiet except to say she had loved him once, and everything just went wrong. The court heard from Khalid's staff, who confirmed seeing Emily near the property days before his death. Surveillance footage, financial records, and phone data left little room for doubt. What was once a private affair had turned into a public scandal, and by the time closing arguments began, the courtroom was filled with silence, everyone waiting for the final verdict that would decide whether love or anger had truly driven Emily to kill. The verdict was delivered on a humid afternoon that seemed to hang heavy over the city. The courtroom was packed with journalists, lawyers, and spectators who had followed every twist of the case. Emily Carter stood between her attorneys, her hands trembling slightly as the judge read out the decision. After months of testimony, witness statements, and forensic evidence, she was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The courtroom murmured with reaction. Some believed justice had been served, others thought the punishment too harsh for what they saw as a crime born from heartbreak. Emily showed no visible emotion. She only looked down, as if the weight of her choices had finally settled on her shoulders. Her incarceration began in a women's correctional facility on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi. For months, she struggled to adjust to the stark, disciplined environment. She spent her days in silence, often reading or staring out the narrow window of her cell. Her pregnancy had ended shortly after her arrest, a miscarriage brought on by stress and exhaustion. It was a detail that never reached the press, but it haunted her daily. The other inmates knew who she was, though most kept their distance. To them, she was the woman who killed a millionaire, a story that had traveled far beyond prison walls. Meanwhile, Khalid Al-Nasir's death sent ripples through Dubai's elite circles. His business empire was quietly reorganized by his brothers, who worked quickly to erase any trace of scandal. Properties were sold, accounts closed, and the villa where the murder occurred was left abandoned for months before being discreetly purchased by another investor. Publicly, the family issued a short statement mourning his loss and condemning the actions that led to it. Privately, they sought to ensure that Khalid's name remained tied to success, not tragedy. Within a year, the case faded from headlines, buried under newer stories and shifting news cycles. Emily's family back in the United States remained mostly silent, speaking only through legal representatives. They appealed several times for her extradition, citing mental instability and emotional distress, but their requests were denied until an international prisoner exchange agreement years later allowed her transfer to an American facility. By then, Emily had served nearly a decade behind bars in the UAE. The years had changed her. Her once bright eyes had dulled, her voice quieter, her spirit subdued. When she was finally moved to a U.S. prison, the media revived the story briefly, re-examining the case and questioning whether justice had truly been done. From her cell in the United States, Emily granted one interview to a small documentary crew. Her words were brief and measured. She said she had loved Khalid deeply, that she had believed in their future, and that fear had made her lose control.
"He promised a life he never intended to give," she said softly, before refusing to speak further.
That single sentence reignited public fascination, sparking debates about power, love, and betrayal. Some viewed her as a cold-blooded killer. Others saw her as another casualty of a toxic relationship where emotion clashed with privilege. Even years after her conviction, the story of Khalid and Emily lingered online, retold in podcasts, documentaries, and crime channels that dissected every detail. The villa, now remodeled and owned by someone new, stood silently by the sea, its past buried but never forgotten. To outsiders, it was just another luxury home in Dubai. But to those who knew the story, it was a haunting reminder of how love, greed, and desperation had collided one fateful night, turning passion into tragedy and leaving behind a mystery that would never completely fade.